Okay, welcome to the presentation this morning. So this is called The Creative Way to Beat Burnout. It's a reset for women in STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. Otherwise, how to complete the stress cycle, reset your energy, and find a bit of space to breathe. And I'm your presenter, Alexandra Reid. And this presentation is inspired by a book I read called Burnout, and it's written by two sisters, Amelia and Emily Nagase. So, this session is about something we don't talk about enough in STEM, the toll that stress takes, not just intellectually, but also physically and emotionally. So, we're going to go beyond self care as a buzzword and get into the real mechanisms behind burnout. And one of the reasons that I've paired science with creativity today is simple is, we don't just need information. We need tools that can reconnect us with our bodies, with meaning, and also with each other. So you're in the right place if you feel guilty for resting, but still feel you can't catch up. You love your career, but the feeling of burnout is real. You wake up tired no matter how early you go to bed. You've tried various self-care techniques, but nothing seems to be really helping. And I want you to be aware that burnout isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent. It looks like you're hitting all your deadlines, but you're feeling numb inside. It looks like having a job you once loved, but you're waking up every day with a sense of dread. And it's often in visible environments like STEM, where pushing through is the norm and slowing down feels like failure. And one of the most powerful insights I had from the book, Burnout, is that burnout isn't a personal flaw. It's actually a physiological and a systemic outcome, especially for high achieving women who've been trained to both overgive and overfunction. So you can think of today as a bit of a soft reset. You're going to leave today with tools that work with your nervous system, not against it. You'll learn today why burnout isn't just stress, it's what happens when stress gets stuck in the body. We'll talk about the hidden trap that keeps high achieving women in STEM feeling overwhelmed. And I'm going to give you three simple strategies that help you to reset your energy and also protect your focus. And towards the end, I'll also share about a small group coaching program that I'm launching in the fall as well, which is designed for creative resetting. So you'll start to understand why certain strategies like pausing, drawing, or even just, simple laughter with a friend can do more for your health than just pushing through one more task. And this is based in the neuroscience of completing the stress cycle, which is basically explaining why just simply removing the stressors doesn't actually make the stress go away. You actually have to physically complete the stress response. Otherwise, it actually stays in your body. So this is about getting relief from that. It's also about learning to how to respond, not just simply react. And yeah, as I mentioned towards the end, we'll talk a bit more about this program that I'm designing with the creative tools and some structured reflection. So just a quick little icebreaker. Imagine it's, 6 months from now and burnout is no longer running the show. This isn't meant to just be a visualization exercise for productivity. It's meant to be a personal check-in. So if burnout wasn't in the driver's seat anymore, what would that free up in your life? You know, would you have more patience? Would you have more sleep, more time for enjoyable activities, more time for just simply moving your body? And sometimes we think we need to overhaul everything to feel better. But I want to remind you that wellness isn't a final destination. It's more about how we move through the daily stress with more awareness and support. So you may want to think about what feels different in your day. What's one thing that's shifted for you? So this is just a quick overview of what we'll be going through is unpacking the science of burnout and why simply rest alone doesn't feel like it's working. Talk a bit about some of the hidden pressures keeping women in STEM stuck in a stress cycle. Three simple tools to reset, not just push through. And we will be doing a creative activity, what I call sort of a live burnout reset, and talk about how to keep going afterwards. So this session follows the arc of awareness to insight to action. We'll explore why traditional self-care doesn't work when you're stuck in a stress cycle. We'll look at the hidden burnout traps, especially for women in STEM, where, the game is often rigged. It's often asking us for more than is just simply for one human to sustain. We'll talk about doing the creative reset tool during the session. It's just a few minutes and no art skills are required, just pen and paper. And the goal of this is to help your body and brain feel a little more regulated, a little less on and a little more present. And yes, yep, there's a chance today to continue after this masterclass. But again, this is just about giving you options, not any obligations. So, what is burnout? And you can think of burnout being chronic stress plus an unfinished stress cycle. So, burnout isn't just being tired, it's when your body is stuck in the stress mode even after the stressor is gone. You can remove the deadline, you can finish the project, take the vacation, and still feel hollow or wired or exhausted. And that's because your stress response hasn't been completed. So the real danger isn't the stress itself, it's this chronic unprocessed stress that stays in your body and accumulates day after day. And if you don't learn how to release it, it does build up. And that's why burnout shows up physically. It shows up as brain fog, recurring illnesses, sleep disruption, just emotional numbness. So if you felt like something's been wrong with you for being this tired, this disconnected, this fed up, it's not a personal flaw. It's actually physiology. This is a physical effect in your body. And there's three core components: the emotional exhaustion, where you're feeling still drained even after resting, the depersonalization, where you're feeling numb or cynical about your work, and reduced accomplishment, like nothing you do really matters, that you have no impact. And why does this hit women harder? Why does the feeling of burnout hit women in STEM harder? And it's often because STEM environments reward overwork. But for women, especially, there's another layer. You're not just doing the job, you're proving that you deserve to be in the room. This means working harder to be taken seriously, to be visible, not to be taken for the assistant in the corner. And the irony is, the more competent you are, the more responsibilities you're given without more support. There's pressure always to perform at 110%, feeling that you need to prove yourself over and over again. Overwork is praised. Having recovery, it's ignored. So burnout in this context isn't just exhaustion. You can almost think of it as more of a moral injury. You're doing your best inside a system that isn't built to support your well-being. The book Burnout calls this a rigged game, and framing that helps to shift the blame away from you personally and more towards the system that is demanding too much and is giving back too little. There's no built-in system to help you reset for this. So, the stress cycle, why do you still feel exhausted? It is a biological process with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the problem is, most of us never actually get to the end of the cycle. Animals naturally release stress, humans tend to suppress it. When I take my dog out for a walk in the morning and he passes by a strange dog, he'll start getting agitated. He'll, just start straining at the leash to get away. And as soon as we're past the strange dog, he shakes himself all over, literally shakes off the stress, and keeps going on with his day. So that's the key takeaway, is that stress and stressors are not the same. The stressor is the deadline, the toxic boss, the expectations. And stress is what happens in your body in response to it. So simply just removing the stressor doesn't clear the stress. It's like your body was gearing up to run from a tiger and the tiger's gone, but your muscles are still tense, your heart's still racing, your cortisone levels are still super high. And unless you complete this stress response, and we'll talk about some simple ways you can do that, it could be with movement, breath, social connection, it will stay literally stuck in your body. And stuck stress doesn't just make you tired, it can make you sick over time. So, how do we get unstuck? We complete the cycle. And one of the best studied and most effective methods is movement. It can be just going for a walk, dancing in your kitchen, getting up to stretch from your chair, or literally, as my dog does, shake it out. It doesn't have to be a gym workout. As I said, walking around the block, stretching in your chair, having a little dance party by yourself. Other effective ways do include deep breathing, especially long exhales. So you can think of it as what they call box breathing, where you breathe in for 4 counts, you hold for 4 counts, and you release for 8 counts. And this helps with heart rate variability and it starts to reset your body. And simply, we are social beings. Connecting with others, just a simple laughter, a longer hug with somebody, a real conversation where you don't feel like you have to be on guard. Yeah. But I also want to echo another tool in here, which we'll be leading into, is creative expression also counts. Drawing, journaling, singing, mindful doodling. All these methods signal to your nervous system that you're safe now. The danger is past. The body can let go of the stress. You don't need to do all of these techniques. One strategy practiced regularly is enough to start changing your baseline. Yeah. And again, I want you to think about what's doable for you right now. It's not a trick question. There's no best method. It's only what feels, possible for you. We've been conditioned to believe that if we can't overhaul everything, we shouldn't bother. But, I want to remind you that small actions done consistently do change our biology over time. So the idea is to pick something that works for you that fits your life today, not your ideal life, not your aspirational person, you know. And maybe that's just simply taking a slow breath before your next meeting. Maybe it's texting a friend, or maybe it's just getting up and stretching for 60 seconds from your chair. Start observing how choosing to do something, however small, shifts your mindset from feeling stuck to feeling a bit more supported in your body. Yeah. One of the real reasons burnout hits us so hard is, again, we've been taught to overwork, overgive, and always be on. This is where we need to start challenging the story that many of us carry, that if we're burned out, we must be doing something wrong. But, I want you to reframe this. Women, especially in professional or caregiving roles, are often taught to overfunction, to perform, to give, to produce, and to keep smiling through it all. We internalize the idea that our worth comes from being endlessly available to others. So even if we know we're exhausted, guilt stops us from resting. And, rest feels like a failure, even though when we know we need it. The pressure isn't just the stress, it's that pressure to be everything for everyone. It's not just about individual choices. There is a cultural script, promoting this. And, that script is broken. It's not working for us. Burnout becomes almost inevitable when we live in a system that expects more from us than it's willing to give back and support us in. So keep in mind, burnout isn't a personal failure, but it's just a sign that you're carrying more than one human's worth of responsibility. The book Burnout calls this the human giver syndrome, the idea that women are meant to be givers of energy, of calm, of care, of support, but not receivers. And when you're socialized to be a giver, rest feels selfish, right? We're expected to always be emotionally available, putting others first, even when we're exhausted, and still staying productive at all costs. Saying no feels like letting people down. Even just simply being seen as tired can feel like you're not doing enough. And this mindset shows up everywhere from over volunteering at work to skipping lunch to answering emails. And the end result is that you learn to disconnect from your own needs, which isn't just exhausting. It's dehumanizing because you're not a machine, you are a whole person. And you have to think of your needs, they're not a burden. Rest isn't meant to be a reward for being productive. It is a biological requirement, and you shouldn't have to feel like you need to earn the rest. Then there's the perfectionism loop. And perfectionism often feels like ambition, but it's really about safety. If I'm perfect, I won't be criticized. If I don't make mistakes, I'll finally feel like I'm enough. I want to remind you, perfectionism doesn't prevent burnout, it actually accelerates it. It doesn't push you forward, it keeps you stuck because you can never win. You overwork, you burn out, you feel guilty for slowing down, so you push harder. There's always something else you should be doing better. And in STEM, that pressure is amplified by the high stakes environments and constant evaluation. We push ourselves to the edge thinking it's going to prove our value, but usually that just ends up depleting us more. If you've ever stayed late just to look committed, or you've rewritten things 5, 6 times just to avoid being judged or critiqued on it, you're not alone. That's not a weakness. That's the perfectionism loop. And, there's a way out of that. STEM culture is rewarding this hustle, but it doesn't make you better at the job. So I want you to keep in mind some micro boundaries. These are things that can help protect your energy. Big boundaries can feel intimidating. And that's why these micro boundaries are so powerful, is that they help to interrupt burnout before it escalates. First of all, there's the 5-minute no. Pause before automatically saying yes to being asked to something. This gives you space to check in with yourself before committing. Next, there's the me first rule, which, starts your day with doing one small thing just for you. It reclaims the start of your day before your energy gets hijacked by the rest of the day. And then there's the permission slip. Write down something, even just on a post-it note that, something you're allowed to do today, even if it's just rest. That helps you override the guilt voice that says you should be doing more. They always say to stop shoulding all over yourself. That's where this permission comes in. So, what's important here about these little micro boundaries? I don't want you to think of being defiant. It's more about being intentional. When we protect our energy in small ways, we signal to our nervous system, I'm safe. I'm not on fire. I can rest. And I don't want you to just think you have to say no to everything, but if you pause first, you get to choose what you say yes to. And, stories help us see what's possible. You know, Sarah, a software engineer, she was constantly overwhelmed. She started using this 5-minute no pause before saying yes. So, she didn't quit her job or change her whole life, but she started just taking this little small pause before she said yes. And that is a simple mind shift. It gave her enough space to check, do I have capacity to do this? Is it aligned with what matters to me? So the result isn't just fewer commitments, it's having more energy, more clarity, and more self confidence. And that's a step towards burnout recovery. It doesn't require a grand gesture, it's just often just a small single choice that breaks the old pattern, right? Most people don't need more willpower, they just need more permission. And definitely within weeks, her stress levels dropped and she had more time to focus. She had more clarity. She gave herself permission to say no. So this is our first little creative activity. I call it the small wins pathway. And so we're going to pause now and try one of the reset tools. And this is where science meets the practice. I again want to say you don't need artistic skills. You don't even need to like drawing, just be able to use a pen and paper. The point here is to shift your attention from thinking to sensing, from productivity mode into being present. This is a way to complete the stress cycle using visual expressions. Your body can process what your brain has been carrying. There's no right way to do this. You can't get it wrong. So, if you have a pen and paper handy, we're going to do a quick visual reflection. It's about looking at the progress you've already made. So, step one is to draw your path. So, we're going to start by drawing a curvy or zigzag line across the page. This line represents past few weeks of your life, your personal path through stress, through effort, and looking at some small, quiet wins. This isn't about drawing something beautiful. It's just a way to visualize your experience, to give form, to make it tangible, your experience, putting it on paper. You don't need to overthink it. Just let your pen move. You're literally mapping out the terrain you've been walking. So again, don't overthink it. It's just a container for the next step. Now you're going to look back along that path. Where were some moments that you made a choice for your own well-being, even if it was just a tiny moment? A day you closed your laptop on time, a moment you said no, a breath you took before reacting. Write down 3 to 5 small wins, moments where you took a real break, said no to something. You chose rest over feeling guilty and you felt even slightly better. And, add a little symbol. Could be a heart where you felt better. Could be a star where you took, a pause. Could be just a little, seedling where you took that moment to have some well-being and take a chance to actually nourish yourself. These are wins and your nervous system notices them, even if you don't take time to notice them, in your head. Your body notices them. In the book Burnout, it talks about the monitor, which is the part of your brain that tracks progress. It's what fuels hope. So even one small step towards relief can help to reset the system. So yeah, write down your wins, then mark them with a simple symbol, something personal to you. And this shows you on paper, tangibly, you're not just surviving, you are moving forward with your path. There are all these wins that are helping you get there. And this is how burnout recovery begins. It begins with recognition, acknowledging your wins, taking that pause. So just want you to sort of sit with your paper, take a breath, and look at the path. What does it show you? Maybe you've actually done more than you've realized. Maybe there's some patterns. or some gaps or, anything that sort of gives you that moment to think back and take a moment to check in with yourself. You know, where have you created space for yourself? What's helped you move forward? Even just a little bit. Again, I want to remind you that you don't need to overhaul your entire life. You just need to start building an awareness and some recovery rituals that meet you where you are. You know, this drawing is it's one of those rituals. It's a small thing to do, it's something private to do, but you can think of it as visually journaling, right? It gives you a chance to reflect and you can look back at it after time. You can sort of say, okay, this is a snapshot of how I was feeling that day. Make a few notes on it, date it. You can come back to it a week later and say, hey, how am I feeling now? Where am I along this path? So, what comes next? So, you have sort of the high level view of what burnout is and getting a sense of what some relief could be. And what I've designed is basically a 12-week program that helps to build a creative toolkit for stress relief. And it's done with a small supportive group of women in STEM who get it. It's meant to be a cooperative effort. You don't have to carry the burnout alone or wait for time to magically appear. It's about making space for yourself bit by bit with tools that are meant to fit your life. Each of these sessions builds on the previous one. It helps you reconnect with what matters and feels grounded again. The best thing about peer support, working in a small group like this, means you're not the only one trying to hold it all together. You're sharing stories and experiences. This 12-week creative reset program, it's meant to create some structure and a bit of breathing room. So instead of trying to fix burnout with solo efforts, you work alongside others who understand the pressure of STEM careers. Each week we go through some live coaching exercises, we do some reflective journaling, and we do more creative activities to help shift that stress physically and emotionally. There's a lot of power of being seen and heard by others in similar shoes to ours, and that helps actually reset things even further. So the results are just personal. You'll find they'll ripple into your work, they build up your clarity, they build up your self-confidence. So I'll be launching this in the fall, and I'm just building up awareness that the program is available. So each session focuses on a different aspect of burnout recovery, like building boundaries, like learning about our energy drains, working on perfectionism. We start with coaching tools, we do short creative exercises to process what comes up, and then we reflect as a group. The reason I've kept it intentionally small is it helps to build safety and trust. You'll have space to share your stories, to be witnessed, and you get to learn from the insights of others. Some of the most powerful breakthroughs are hearing from, someone else saying what you're feeling, but you didn't have the words for it. Suddenly they said it. It was like, oh, it's like you've seen inside my head. This really helps, I find. I'm doing a pilot program right now with a number of women, and these little aha moments, it's amazing what moves the needle, I think, especially seeing it playing out like this. And it's backed by science. It's not just a feel-good workshop. It is grounded in how your nervous system actually works. Creative coaching helps regulate the stress responses. It helps you learn to integrate your emotions and also rewire how you respond to overwhelm. You'll gain some real insights into your patterns, but you'll also start learning to practice doing things differently with support, both from myself as the coach and from the group. The group structure adds a layer of consistency and motivation that is hard to create on your own. You'll learn to reset in ways that are both, gentle, supportive, but they are really effective in getting a transformation. So it helps you complete the stress cycle so the burnout doesn't stay stuck. It engages both your brain and body through the coaching creativity. It's a mix of neuroscience, psychology, and nervous system regulation. And I've designed this for busy women, high achieving women, right? These are meant to be short, digestible tools that fit within your schedule. So as I mentioned, it is a small cohort, only 10 women. Space is limited, but that is intentional. But yeah, if you're curious, definitely check out my website at mindartwellness.com. I am doing clarity calls where you can talk about whether it's a fit for you, learn more about the program, and get a sense of what my coaching's like as well. So we can sort of get get a taste of the coaching style, and we can walk through what kind of support would serve you best. So, yeah, the idea is that you don't need it all figured out, just a willingness to try something different. And the women who've done this work say often the biggest shift wasn't just how they felt, but how they thought about themselves, right? They stopped apologizing for needing rest. They spoke up more at work and they reconnected with what made them feel alive again, right? And they didn't do it alone. This peer coaching adds some depth. When somebody else reflects what you're thinking back to you, it lands differently. You feel seen. So this program is intended to give you both sort of the inner reset, but also the outer support to sustain it. So, and I did mention the clarity call. It's where we get to explore your burnout patterns and try some of these creative tools live on the call. Yeah, so on my website, or you can actually email me directly at coach@lexireidstudio.com. And yeah, you'll get a sense of whether the program's a good match for you at this time or perhaps at a later time. But sometimes just having that one experience sparks a shift. You get to ask these questions about the group format, the weekly structure, whether it's a fit for your needs. But I want you to think of this call as just a preview. There's no commitment to it. But, if you are feeling drawn to it, I do want you to trust that instinct. It's worth exploring. But this is obviously the most common thing I hear. I don't have time, and I get it. When you're burned out, the idea of adding something else just feels even more exhausting. But I think you realize the truth is burnout's not going to resolve it by itself, right? It doesn't go away when your schedule clears. It doesn't go away when the project wraps up or you take that one weekend off because, as we talked about, the stress is still living in your body. This program is designed for your burned out self, not your ideal self. You don't have to carve out hours, just give yourself 10 quiet minutes a day and let that be enough. So if you're waiting for the perfect time to start feeling better, maybe this is it. It's less time than scrolling on your phone, the doom scroll, the compare and despair. Burnout's not going to fix itself, but taking these small shifts do help make a difference. The little drawing you made today, that's proof that your reset doesn't have to be dramatic to be meaningful. Small steps matter. And when you start taking them consistently with the right kind of support, change does become possible. And that's what this program's about, creating a series of small guided resets that move you through, getting through the day to actually feeling more like yourself. And you don't have to do it alone. The support and structure are here when you're ready. So let's come back to where we started. Okay. Your work matters, but so do you. So burnout isn't just about stress. It's about all the ways we get stuck in expectations, isolation, and overfunctioning. Today we unpacked why women in STEM are especially vulnerable and how even just setting these small boundaries can shift how you free your time, your energy, and your nervous system. You tried doing a simple creative reset. You felt what 5 minutes of space and self-reflection can do. And I've given you some options to keep it going. Because, yeah, your work does matter, but so do you. And recovery isn't meant to be a luxury, it's your human right. You are a person, not a machine. So we've looked at, how burnout is an incomplete stress cycle. We've looked at some of the hidden traps, and we've looked at a few minor micro boundaries for, helping to burn proof yourself. So I want to thank you for being here, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. I know it takes effort to show up for something like this, especially when you're stretched super thin. And I do want to honor that. If there's one message I hope you're leaving with is that, you're not broken, you're not failing, you're just burned out, and there's a way through that. These small shifts you've made today, whether it's taking a deep breath, making a line on the page, taking a moment to reflect, all of those things matter. They're not trivial. They are powerful because they're intentional. You made that choice. If you're ready, I'd love for you to join the program with me and take this a bit further. But even if all you do is carry one insight forward from today, I think that's enough. Work with that. And finally, please remember this, you don't have to be more worthy of rest. You already are. Take care of yourself. Reach out to me if you have any questions and, keep making space to breathe. And thank you for joining me today.